Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives through various ideas and current events. As we chase what's true, we continue to calibrate our thoughts and focus our efforts to engage honestly and graciously with a hostile culture. Today we're going to discuss pronouns and dead naming, a little bit about the war metaphor, and some political convulsions and continuing observations. So,
yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you ever noticed that you often want to say good morning, even if it's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock? If you go into I do. When I go into a public place and I'm engaged in business and something, I want to say good morning, even if it's not the morning.
It feels like more of an introduction.
It does. I never want to say good afternoon if it is, right? I just want to say good morning.
So is that pulpit training? You know, because the pulpit is always good morning.
That's true.
When our church went, after COVID, we started having church in another building, another church's building.
Evening.
The good morning just flows out, even if it's in the evening.
That could be. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, let's start with an opening question here.
Okay.
Dead naming. This is a question I like your thoughts.
This is loaded. Here we go.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about pronouns before. So articulate, you could summarize that if you wanted, because I think you and I found ourselves on the same page.
Yeah.
But how would you, or would you shift it for the whole dead name? Somebody says, I want to be called Clarissa and my name is Charlie.
Right.
I was born whatever, okay?
Yeah.
How would you articulate that? Trying to be biblical or loving your neighbor, you know? What do you think?
I mean, to me, the number one question is...
I was asked this, by the way, by somebody.
Yeah. So to me, the number one question is it an attempt at a manipulation? Are they trying to gain power in this conversation? In which case, I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to do it. If it's a humble expression of I'm trying to figure out who I am, I think I'm going to have a lot more flexibility, but I'm still not going to do the pronouns because it's lying, and I'm not going to participate in the lie. And that's also why I would have a hard time even with the name change, because I don't think it's loving to them to accept this false identity.
So if there was a lot of other issues and the name change had perhaps multiple dynamics in a struggle,
it always
that would be
does.
one thing.
That's the hard part. It always has multiple dynamics. There always is this genuine search for meaning and who am I really and what makes me who I am.
Yeah.
But there's also this, my feelings are the most important thing. And that harms people to let their feelings take charge over any social atmosphere. It harms it harms everyone.
Wait, so what you're saying is their struggle with their feelings, they're putting on you and saying you struggle with, you let my feelings dominate this relationship also.
Right. I remember as a teacher, early on, I was teaching middle school. I had been a teacher for 5 years, and this kid, or maybe it was a mom even, said, well, my child's feelings were hurt. And that was the reason that there should be a punishment or there should be a change.
Yeah.
And I had never heard that before. I'd never crossed my mind that someone's feelings would be the reason. The only reason I could ever consider was it's the right thing. It's a better thing. It's going to help people more. So just the presentation of my negative emotions should dictate how things should run. I just can't.
Considered a persuadable argument.
It was, yes. It was as if, of course, everyone will accept this reasoning, and I just don't.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I had not thought about that at all. I was only going along the lines of truth and lie. And the pronoun seems to me clear. I can't lie for you.
That's right.
And actually not just for you, but with you and hurt you.
Yeah, because the lie is perpetuating harm to this person who's asking you to lie.
Yeah.
Even though they will tell you the opposite.
Yes, that's right.
Because they're not lying. They're not lying.
Yeah.
They're being deceived.
Yeah.
And they're participating in the deception.
Yeah. And what I ended up saying to the person who asked me about the name changing, and of course called dead naming, but was that if the name change was explicitly gender oriented, then I'd put it in the pronoun category.
Yeah.
If it was less explicitly, and maybe even the neutral, there are some names that are somewhat neutral, right? They can go female, male. Even if it was that, or if it was another kind, then I'd probably just do what they wished because they're not asking me on a very clear way to lie with them.
Yeah, well, here's something I think about is if you knew someone who was just always asking you to change their name, not connected to their sexual identity or anything like that, and I had a student once, and the mom would just announce, well, he's going by this name now.
Yeah, yeah,
and he's
yeah,
going by
yeah.
that name
Yep,
now.
yep, yep.
And it was all a variation on the first or the middle name,
yep,
and then
yep.
a shortened this letters.
Yeah.
But everybody sort of looks at each other like, who's in charge of this kid?
Right.
And that, because a name defines who you are.
Yes.
Right? And
Yeah.
a name comes from the people to whom you belong, your parents.
Yeah.
They name you.
Yeah.
So anytime a kid is declaring their own name, I think this is an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I had a friend some years ago. Hopefully he doesn't hear this, but I think his name was Theodore, which he didn't like, and he grew up in the Midwest, and he was Ted. He moves to the West Coast.
Which is a variation on a theme,
yes,
right?
It is. That's fine. He moves to the West Coast, and he's Theo. And I didn't know he was Ted until many years later, and we were very close friends. And I remember the feeling of shock. And I didn't know why I felt shocked.
Yeah.
But I think partly what it was is the utter black and white. He chose to be a new person.
Right. I thought I knew you.
I thought I knew you. Does this mean I don't know you because you were Ted before?
Or that these other people who call you this other name, do
Yes,
they know you
that's
in a way
right.
that I don't?
That's right.
Yeah,
And
which they do.
Caused
It's true.
discontinuity, and it was not upsetting is too strong, but it disturbed me. I didn't know how to interact.
Put you on your
with
heels a little bit.
It did. It did.
I had a thought about pronouns.
Yeah.
So I saw this example where a person was referring to a stranger as they. In other words, talking about some unknown person who hadn't
Sure.
arrived yet, and they'll be here soon.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it sounded completely normal. You read through it, and
Yes.
it's like, and then at the end it says, "Surprise! You've been using they them pronouns all along."
Oh, pff.
And immediately, what it confirmed is that it's not just a plural. You're speaking about they, a group. We also use it to speak of someone whom we don't know.
Yes, that's right.
stranger.
They're the other.
And that's immediately the sense I get when someone says my pronouns are they, them.
Yeah.
It's like a pushing them to a
Yes.
distance. Like, oh, I don't know you.
Keep me out of the UI
And I almost
relationship.
can't know you.
Yep. I agree.
It actually reminds me of teenagers I've known, and adults too, to be honest, who will dress in such a way that is shocking as almost a boundary setting, like stay back, look at me, but don't know me.
That's right. I agree.
Especially if you're a conservative person,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Martin Buber wrote a famous book. It's been some time, but I and Thou, and kind of a liberal Christian, but it was a great book in terms of God. What you're after is I and Thou, and not third person. It's second person address.
Wait, you're going to have to
I'm
explain
facing
what thou is.
You. It's the old. So this was written in the 40s.
What's the difference between you and thou? Isn't
Nothing.
there
It's just
some
old English.
Okay. I remember the thee and the thou, it had a formality to it,
Yeah.
right? And then there's the you all,
Yeah.
which would be ye or something. I don't remember.
Ye.
There's rules about all that.
Well, if you're enjoying the conversation, make sure to click subscribe so you can get our next episode sent your way automatically. You can also, depending on the media you're in, you can click like and leave a comment or a review and share with a friend. I had somebody saying, I'm listening on Spotify. I don't see a like button. I said, I think that's on YouTube.
Yeah.
So it depends on what media you're in.
If you wanted to do a like
right.
button on Spotify, you could actually leave a review,
That's true.
and that would actually help.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump into our opening segment here, the war metaphor.
Okay.
Let's start because I'll tell you what the war thing is, and then let's start with Tucker to
And
get
this
into
is a
it.
biblical war metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is you actually. Our last episode, we were talking about something else, and we veered into this. And I think it was when you're talking about discipling unbelievers and just
culture
wrestling
war.
through the culture war and engagement and those things. And then I said some phrase consistent with things that I'm thinking, and you said something along these lines. But war, it has to mean something.
Yeah. If the Bible is saying
If they're
we're
saying
in a
it,
war.
what's it mean? And you weren't frustrated with me at all, but I felt a sense of what I said made you think, are you emptying it out? And so I've been thinking about it for the last couple of days, and quite a bit actually. Yesterday, I spent a good deal of time. So I want to talk about what that war metaphor means. But that's where I want to go with it.
Okay.
But let's start with the Tucker thing, because I think he gets at this same issue here, or the need for the conversation. So there was a video on Tucker. You watched it. What was that? Some speech he gave, right?
Yeah. He's at a conference.
What do you think about it? What would be your summary of it?
Well, it's very moving, the way he speaks about what's going on. It feels more frank, like matter of fact, this is where we're at, in ways that I don't hear any other pundits doing.
Yeah.
At the same time, it feels a little bit more hopeless. The thing that shocked me was his statement that politics is over. Like, politics is when people negotiate to a consensus, and I don't get everything I want, you don't get everything you want, but we come to an agreement and we rule based on peace.
Yeah.
Right? Negotiation.
Yeah.
That's just not happening anymore.
It isn't.
And that's one of the things that I've been feeling since 2020 election, is this recognition that they don't actually care what we think anymore. There's so many issues like immigration, for example, where they poll U.S. citizens and it's 70+% all agree, and Congress yet still won't do a thing.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of things like that, like late-term abortions. Almost everybody agrees we should get rid of them. They're still not going to do it.
I watched another interview of him. I forget the group, a 2-hour podcast, but it was video like we do. Mm-hmm. And he literally said, we don't, he said democracy, goes, but that's not what we're in anymore, and it's been some time.
Yeah.
We do not live in a democracy anymore.
Yeah.
So.
And if politics, if democracy is over, then all we have left is war.
Yeah.
Because politics is the mechanism where we can negotiate peacefully.
Yeah.
Transitions of power and a progress.
And in that video, he says, nobody's getting what they want in politics. That's the messiness of it.
Well, and the other thing he said is,
compromising.
In the past, it was the left has a different method to get to the same end that we both want. I think we'll have more prosperity with lower taxes. You think we'll have more prosperity caring for the poor.
Right.
And his point that he made in this speech was, they're not after that anymore.
Yes.
They're just doing evil things for evil's sake.
I thought that was an exceptional point. He said, I used to say follow the money, which was a Rush thing. And he goes, it's true. But then I realized it began to be not true. Then you think, is it about power? It often is, but this isn't even about power. And his great illustration was something I think you've been agitated about, is the element of transgenderism. The brutality of abuse in it is evil for the sake of evil, because where's the money and where's the power in it? Even climate change, you could say, serves these money ends. It's laundering a lot of money to the left. You could say it has power ends for world control.
Yeah.
But the child mutilations, they're just evil almost for the sake of evil.
Well, when I talk to educators, for example, who still promote transgenderism for kids, that lie, they believe that we're rescuing them from suicide. Right? If we don't do this, they'll kill themselves.
Yeah.
But the evidence against that is so blatant. And the evidence that it's a socially contagious phenomenon is so blatant.
Yeah.
You almost have to cover your eyes to not see it.
Yeah.
But then I have to remember that my facts are not their facts.
Yeah.
Right? The
Yeah.
things they're seeing in the media every day, because the same algorithm gives them what they want to see and gives me what I want to see.
Yeah. That's a little bit of where I think we should go in the conversation, and which was a part of my thoughts when I said there's two worlds, there's two views, there's two facts. And there's a godless form of them and a theistic form of them that leads down paths in the other. Because one of the things I thought about listening to Tucker when he said that, and here's a phrase he said, that we have, the issues are inane, they're insane, and yet with just bigger bombs. He goes, crazier issues with bigger bombs. And he goes, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And but what it made me ask this question is, it made me think the number one issue, here's another thing, the way he said it. He said, we get told what's important because of what he called them, middle-aged white women. I think he called them.
Yeah.
Right? Their concerns are what drive the conversations.
Yeah.
And their neuroses. And then I think this was actually a part of this other podcast as well. The therapy and the SSRs on their brain, he says,
SSRIs.
SSRIs on, all of these dynamics make for the conversation we're having right now, which gets back to our feminization that we had talked about as well.
Yeah.
But then he said, so what are the real issues? And he got asked that on this other podcast. What's the number one issue and whatnot? Well, so I was thinking as I listened to this, you know what? If I try to step back and what's in the news all the time, what's the craziest things being said? And I think, what is the number one issue? I think it is this: what role does God have in a pluralistic society? I think that's what we're
the
struggling
number one
with.
debate is: are we going to have a pluralistic society or not?
Because
Because I see a lot of Christians saying the obsession with pluralism is what got us into this mess.
Yes, it brings up, especially as the secular side begins to be, well, then maybe that's the alternative. A secular form. To be pluralistic, we have to be secular. That's not necessarily true. That's not what the founders thought. They were, I would say, pluralistic, but they were theistic. And that's been rejected.
Yeah.
Right?
Even theism.
Theism has been rejected. And the arguments for it, I don't know, this is a little off the topic.
Wait, when you say theism has been rejected, by whom?
Well, when they say, no, don't pray in school, don't have prayer.
Yeah, but who's they?
Whoever said that. I mean, the people who made the
Supreme
lawsuits
Court
and the
Supreme Court
judges.
ruled that, right, in 1960, whatever, 70, 72 maybe, I don't remember, that the prayer was no longer allowed in schools. Yeah. But there's a, so the who question to me matters because that gets to what I consider to be the spiritual war or the culture war, which I kind of think are the same thing, which is that we're engaged in this spirit that's functioning behind whatever we all know and have this feeling of like, oh, this is the acceptable opinion.
Right.
But why do we all agree that this is the acceptable opinion? Our teachers told us, the TV told us, but somebody behind. And that's what I think is the spiritual war.
Yeah.
And I think we have to engage it as if it's a hostile actor that wants to steal your kids and destroy your community and tear your marriage down. And
yeah, I agree with that. I also think we have to talk about it. I think, okay, here's what I think. If we are completely in the spiritual forces behind issues, then we lose sight. It almost becomes, when we talk to people, or when I even talk to myself and think about spiritual warfare, it's a difficult arena. It's murky. It's ambiguous.
an ethically charged. Is that what you're saying? Like it's hard to navigate?
No, it's unclear.
Yeah, like the boundaries are unclear.
Yeah, because it's an invisible foe. How do you swing at an invisible foe?
Okay, so here's
We struggle
my
with
thought.
God.
And
How do
correct me if I'm wrong, but what God said to Eve in the curse section of Genesis 3 was that the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent. Is that not
yes.
so? Not the serpent, but the seed of the serpent would be crushed. So when Jesus is going around as the descendant of the woman,
seed of the serpent would be crushed?
I'm pretty sure. Check it out.
I think it is that, but I thought it was.
But he
him
refers
also.
to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the keepers of the law, as sons of the devil, the seed of the serpent. So it's not the day-to-day, your neighbor, your friend, this person who struggles with their background in church and what happened to them. It's the people who are pushing it, Jesus treats them as a foe, with mockery, with name-calling, with a dare to face him, right? With refusals to answer their basic questions.
You're
Returning
saying
with more
the
questions.
surrogates are not excluded, neither are they considered the only foe.
It's not just the spiritual beings, but
Yeah.
it's their representatives.
Yes, that's what I meant by surrogates.
Yeah.
So here's what it is. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, he's speaking to the serpent, and between your offspring and her offspring, so there's your point. But then the other one makes the last phrase is, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
So
it's both.
There's a war between the offspring of the serpent and those offspring of God.
Yeah. Well, so if God is the number, if the role of pluralism and how do we interact with God? What do I want to ask here?
Well, let me use a war strategy metaphor and see if it connects with what you're thinking. I was having this conversation with some friends. The idea of old-fashioned war strategy Think of Revolutionary War where all the guys with muskets stand in a line.
Yeah.
And then they advance and then they shoot and then they advance or they retreat. And that goes all the way back to Greek and Roman, and it's how it's been done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the history of war, there have been people who fight differently. They fight in a way that's fluid, to where you don't need to stop and line up, but instead, if you're having success, you advance. If you're not having success, you retreat.
Mm-hmm.
If you see someone over here having success, you go support them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're moving back and forth and around. And this is how insurgencies succeed over the course of years, right? How do the Iraqis or the Taliban survive against this high-tech and advanced war machine that is the United States military?
Mm-hmm.
They do this. They push, they pull. Okay. And what traditional militaries want to do is stop and everybody line back up. Like, oh, we had success. Now we need to stop the success and line up. But the risk with pushing out ahead, like, oh, we're winning over here, is that the enemy might make you think you're winning. And now you advance and you get enveloped.
Yeah.
Right? And now you're all alone. And so this is the strategy conversations that I think Christian leaders need to be having, is saying, where are we having this success? Where can we support those who are making advancements so they don't get isolated and pushed out alone, run out ahead and get cut off from their support? And where do we need to resist this impulse that everybody needs to line up and be the same? Mm-hmm. And that was that Doug Wilson thing. It's like, oh, you're doing this strategy, the Gospel Coalition's doing this other strategy, and we don't jive with that, and so now we're at odds. Mm-hmm. It's like, no. Support each other where we're getting success and retreat where you're hitting a wall.
Well, I agree with the last part there, where in an army, you're going to have various forms of strategy and what you consider, and you have to let them be what they are. You also have to think to yourself, one, I might disagree with my neighbor, and if I'm right, my neighbor's going to suffer some defeat, and that's going to be sad. If I'm wrong, I'm going to suffer some defeat, and that's going to be sad.
Yeah.
Perhaps we both see a little truth and we can have some success, or we might both be in error. But the point is, it's okay in a broad idea of a war to think this general has this strategy and that general has that, and these troops do it this way and that troop. But you also have to embrace the fact that there may be some that don't work, or that aren't that one general is right to critique another.
Correct.
Right. And so that, the Gospel Coalition and Doug Wilson, it's legitimate to say it's not illegitimate to say I don't agree with that. That's not the same as saying you don't have the freedom to fight that way.
Yeah, well, and also in war, there are boundaries to your tactics, right? And those who reject those boundaries are willing to do things that godly men and women would never do.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking of what you do with children, or what you do with certain types of weapons that are so terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess what that gets to partly, though, is this idea, and this I'm going to jump into the metaphor of war here, ideas, and that is the legitimacy of interacting and disagreeing about something. It could be said, why, and people do say this, why should you and I, for example, spend time talking about something when we're having different perspectives? All that time could be engaged in the war, so to speak, right?
Okay, yeah.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think if it's petty, then it's a waste of time. Mm-hmm. If it's iron sharpening iron, if we're actually engaging in this like we do, we disagree, we come at it from a different perspective and a background, and we're gaining in the end from it. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend of mine, a dear friend, who's a liberal, I would say nominal Christian. He would call himself an ex-evangelical, right? I said, the reason I cherish our conversations is not that I think I'm going to convert you, though I hope to, but it's that I have to remember that you're there, and that like I love you and you're seeking after the truth. I think you're in the wrong, but if it just becomes a war against this evil idea, I can't see every person who's fallen into the camp as evil. So I have to remember real people that I care about who have disagree with me, and say, okay, one, have I considered their opinion and given it respect? But then two, even if I've completely rejected their perspective, I can't reject them.
That's right. Right.
Now, that's not the same as someone who I would say, no, they're actually all in and they are representing evil and perpetuating it. To that person, I have no respect. In the same way that, the prophets of Baal are attacked by Elijah, or the Pharisees are attacked by Jesus.
I think of it as the conversation. So if we talk about the war metaphor and we disagree or push back on, with the value is that itself is part of the war. Because Jesus says the truth will set you free. That's war language. That there's bondage, and we're in bondage. We're captured and captured. Our hearts and minds have been captured. Jesus has come to set us free with what is true. We're trying to work through what is true. And here's the humbling element of it. We identify with the gospel writers in particular in the complete lostness they had when engaging with Jesus. The complete inability to understand so much of what he says that we look back having a larger rearview mirror than they had. We still struggle with it. And we look at their struggle, completely understand it, because he talks like he's an alien from another planet. And in a sense, he is. He's come from somewhere else. And our world is distorted. In Lewis's space trilogy, we're the dark planet that's gone silent and shrouded in darkness and fog and mist. And so he's come to bring light and clarity. And what he has said, it seems opposite in many instances to what we think is natural and understandable. So in the gospel, we are trying to relearn life.
Okay.
To relearn what it means.
Sure.
And that's a legitimate struggle then. And we make mistakes, and we have places inside of us that hold out for a mindset. So in Romans 12, don't be conformed to this world. The problem is our flesh, the whole world, the flesh and the devil, they're all colluding together, and we're not even aware of half of it. And so the gospel comes in to speak a word, and that word may be embraced to us on one front, but it works its way into us to liberate in other areas we didn't even know needed liberation.
Right.
And so to me, part of the conversation of, let's say, Gospel Coalition and Doug Wilson or whatever, that is part of the war. Because we carry the enemy with us, inside of us.
Yeah. Well,
in all of our engagements.
There's double agents, there's infiltrations. Well, think about enemy propaganda in like POWs in a time of war, or Tokyo Rose, or these other ways that both sides of every battle are trying to weaken the resolve of their enemy.
That's right.
That's always happening.
That's right. That's the screw tape letters. I mean,
the other side of that too, it makes me think about in war, and this is the question Israel's facing right now, is what do you do with the bystanders?
I know, it is a question.
And I think that is more of what I'm describing, the difference between a friend who believes something I don't agree. It's like, I don't want to act in this spiritual war like Hamas, going after the women and the children and the citizens. They don't
slaughter
and just destroy everyone. And I think the reason that Christians fall into that when we do is when our ego becomes the centerpiece, and it's about me being right. Which is so insidious, right? It's always there, this draw to feel that pride of being correct.
I agree with that. I also think there's another dynamic that we have seen for the last few years of fear and anger. So I remember visiting California on a spring break a while ago, and friends that we've known for a long time, and interacting with some people I haven't talked with, and meeting certain people who were feeling very angry. And I understood that feeling. It's what I felt after the 2020 election. And I moved away from it in certain ways and for certain reasons. They have not. And when I listen to them, what I hear is this: the anger at the wholesale assault from the progressive left is destructive and damaging, and they're angry about it. And then what mixes into it is they're angry. So there's two angers, and this is where the second one is a fear anger. What they're also angry about is, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Right.
They used to have a voice in our culture. Their voice meant something. If they were angry about it, it could bring about a change for what was in their minds was good and right. And I'm completely in agreement with that it is good and right. But now that they don't have a voice, they're also now angry about that. And so what it has brought into question is, what is it to be, and this is where you and I keep coming back to, what is it to be a Christian and called to be a soldier in a political country that is theistic and free, politically, by and large, relatively speaking?
Okay.
What are we called to in that context? It would be, you and I would not be engaged in the conversation that we keep bumping into if we lived in China in the house church day, and maybe it's a little different right now, or what other country where there's oppression and hiding
in Syria, Egypt.
We wouldn't.
Yeah.
All of these levels of liberty to disagree and work out what the gospel means would just be thrown to the wayside because we'd be surviving.
Right.
And anyone who names himself a brother with some sense of sincerity, boy, arm around each other and let's march together, because we're going to die if we don't.
The other side of that is when you're in that hostile of an environment, people who are nominally or for comfort's sake calling themselves Christians, they fall away.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the cost is
too
high.
The heat is too high. Yeah. Yep. So the war metaphor. Metaphor is it gets to us through some Latin, but it also comes from Greek. Meta being over or with, and for in Greek is to bear something.
Okay.
So literally it's the idea of, in one world, thank you, bearing over a set of ideas into another world.
Okay.
Now, so your point is legitimate and right and biblical and Holy Spirit inspired, that we as Christians are in a war. Well, it's not
the
just,
Bible
in
was
other words,
inspired.
I can't, I'm not conceding something reluctantly. I need to concede it. You made me think about something, and it asked a question of me, and it needs not to be a question of concession, but of embrace.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, it needs to be wholeheartedly embraced rather than reluctantly conceded.
Yeah, begrudgingly.
Begrudgingly.
Right.
And I'm not begrudging, but you don't want to have that posture of mind. And so what I've been thinking about, so what does the war metaphor mean? So you have war in the world, and we could list 100 examples. The Holy Spirit, the apostles, take that reality that they faced, and said, the Christian life is like this.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
But it's also not like it. So the question is, what war word metaphors, what aspects and meanings carry over, and which ones are left in the original? Easy one. Okay. Killing people.
Yeah.
Right? Very few in the 80-20 split. There might be some people who think it's legitimate to go bomb an abortion clinic. Okay?
Very few people think that.
Very few, but there might be some.
Because you're no longer in a spiritual war. Once you do that, you're in a physical war.
The war metaphor would be taking of life is carried over in the Christian life. I can take life too now as a Christian.
Right, but what I'm saying is, at that point, you're no longer, you've left religion, you've left politics, and now you're into like hostile engagement in the tangible physical world.
That's true, but they wouldn't, if I was going to articulate their position, they would not feel they've left the gospel or God or religion. They feel they've carried out the righteous requirements of it because these people are brutally murdering.
No, I think they would. I've had a couple of long conversations with someone who's on that verge of that, I guess I would say. And what he would say is, his argument is one of like legal obligation to defend someone whose physical body is in jeopardy. Okay, it's not a spiritual argument. There is a moral aspect to it. This is evil and wrong. We need to stop it. But beyond that is to say, if someone was here to murder you and I shot them, I would be justified. Why is it different with an abortion clinic? And the answer that I gave was, as long as there are political and spiritual means to oppose this, I think there's an obligation to pursue those before you engage in hostile, physical, tangible war. But that is, like, once you do that, you're no longer in a spiritual war. You've left that realm. And I think they would agree with that, even because they're saying we need to leave the realm and go to physical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't know. I would still, if it were me, I would still feel that it was spiritually driven to engage in the physical world activity of war.
Yeah, I mean, think of like the Crusades.
exactly.
is a similar, like, okay, at
that's
what
right.
point when we're under attack do we stop and say, no, it's actually going to be physical war now?
Yeah.
And that's a question that we have to face. 'Cause
Another example, prisoners. In war, you take people literally, physically as prisoners.
right.
In the gospel era, there is none of that whatsoever. You don't take anybody a prisoner in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I would think when someone is converted to Christianity, they've met God and been transformed, you are stealing them out of.
I agree with that.
So that in a
they've
sense,
changed sides.
The hard part is in a
not-
spiritual war, you're opposing spiritual forces that cannot be killed.
That's correct.
Right? Evil spirits will always exist.
That's right.
They may be condemned to
So,
the lake of fire, but they're still
That's
going to
another
exist.
example. In war, the defeat of your enemy ultimately can find its expression in they no longer exist. They can't raise arms against me in any way now.
Right.
In the spiritual dimension, that can't happen. They can't no longer exist. Now, God can do something to make them not raise arms again, but we don't have that capacity.
And I think the way I would connect it is an effective war strategy is that the leaders of the enemy are no longer able to have influence, and therefore we win the war. Their power, right? Remember we talked about power and authority.
So, but what you've done is you've taken over, carried over, metaphor, a portion of the analogy.
Yeah. Well, I think
what a metaphor is
it carries
for.
pretty well too, because you could say
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Like, I think you could say in World War II, we're not out to kill the maximum number of German soldiers, except to the degree that it brings the Nazi party out of power.
Okay.
Right? If we can spare German soldiers and take the Nazis out, we would do it every way possible.
Yeah.
And that was the argument we made around dropping the atomic bombs in Japan.
Yes. Yeah.
It's going to spare more lives in the end, even though it takes a massive casualty right now.
Yeah.
So in that way, we're not trying to maximize death. We're trying to minimize the power and influence of the enemy, which is what we're spiritual war. That is what we're.
That's
trying to
true.
But you're right. There's no tangible people dying, and therefore they can't.
So the whole idea
impact.
is that the metaphor is legitimate,
Yeah.
but it carries some things over and some things it leaves behind. And the question is what? What gets carried over and what gets left behind?
And anger was interesting. You brought that up because in war, your goal as a warrior is to unleash your anger in a way that maximizes your power, right? Not so angry that you lose your intelligence, because you know what I mean.
It's to marshal it.
But to give it, I listened to a speech by George Patton, from the movie Patton. It wasn't really him.
Yeah.
And he said, some of you are wondering if you'll have what it takes to fight in battle. He says, when you see your best friend's face turned into a pile of goo, you'll know what to do. Mm-hmm. You'll be filled with rage, with a righteous anger of sorts, right? And of tangible war, how righteous can it be? There's always a component of that. But in a spiritual war, how are we, or how should we marshal our anger at the evil that's going on, right? I think about how much anger I feel and betrayal at what's happened to kids, what's happening to kids, public school, social media, so many different influences drawing them into mental illness, into spiritual illness.
So that would be another example of carried over and some things left behind. If I restated what you said, anger is legitimately carried over as a motivator.
Right.
However, the only restraint upon the anger in the real world is that you don't lose focus and clarity. There's not a moral issue. If to be unjustified or to be filled with hatred might have an impact on you, but I don't care about that right now. I just want to win the war, and as long as your anger doesn't make you lose focus, let it drive you.
Yeah, when it's rage, then you're going to fail.
Because of the loss of focus,
That's
they
right.
don't care that the rage might be hatred and a moral wrong.
Right.
In the gospel, though, we have to exercise a greater restraint in that we can't hate our neighbor.
Right. We can't even hate our enemy.
It's not the restriction of efficiency that's at play. It's the moral dimension of what anger is.
Yeah.
Now, don't go to bed even with anger with your wife. It may feel certain things, but it needs to be righteous now. You need to be constantly checking it, submitting it to the gospel, that this anger is a righteous one, that when I oppose a situation and there are people in it, I'm still knowing the fear of the Lord, persuading them. Yeah. I want Nancy Pelosi to believe. Right. I'm not just angry with her hypocrisy and demonization of the right.
Yeah.
In real war, I don't care if you are. As long as you don't lose focus, let war drive you. I don't care if it's moral or immoral. I'm here to just win this battle.
So when I talk, my sons are all teenagers. They're all in high school this year. And we have had this conversation with each of them and as a group about what do you do with your anger as a young man at your brother, at something that's not right, injustice, or at the leftism. That's, they have these conversations too. They listen to this podcast. And one of the things I'm trying to learn myself and then teach them is how to use your anger as fuel. Like, how are we channeling this to the right target versus just aiming at whoever's nearby? Because it's just unspent anger. It's like covering yourself in gasoline and thinking you can give people hugs. You can't.
Yeah.
You got to use that gasoline as fuel to run something. So, I had a conversation with one of my boys who was angry at how a video game turned out, right? And I asked him immediately, okay, how are you going to use that as fuel? Well, I could get better. I could do this. I said, all right, instead of aiming it at the people who beat you, the friends who won the game that you didn't, don't aim it at them. Aim it at your own lack of skill and use it as fuel to come back and turn it into ambition and success. I think that's very godly, even though it also, selfish ambition is also a risk that we're going to have to navigate as well. So I think all of this is lessons of war that apply. Because if you're just unbridled rage in a tangible war, you're going to lose.
Well, and, okay, so sometimes I don't like it when you use the illustration with your kids because I don't want to interact with them because I don't want to, make my interaction be about them rather than the issue you had.
Okay.
But, so let me do this one, but with that caveat, this has nothing to do with whatever kid this was in.
Yeah.
Because doesn't the gospel add this other layer of what you had said, in one sense I would translate as, let it make a determination in you.
Right.
Aim it at your skill set in determination to improve.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, he loses to the Pistons. He's angry. I'm going to work harder because I want to win. Legitimate.
Okay.
But doesn't the gospel come in to say, so wait a minute now, you're angry about a game? Why? Edwards famously had a resolution, resolve not to be angry with an inanimate object.
Okay, yeah.
And he said, when I notice this in me, this is disproportionate. I should never be angry. There is no reason to ever be angry with something that's not doing a moral action.
Okay. I wouldn't say that would apply, though. When you're angry that you fail at some task you set out to accomplish, you're really angry at yourself. Or you're angry at your own lack of performance, lack of skill. And that frustration, if it doesn't turn into accomplishment, will actually create a depressive mood that can be long-standing.
But wait a minute. So let me push back on that.
Okay.
A game.
Yeah.
A competitive person wants to win a game. They lose, they get angry.
Yeah.
After a while, nobody wants to play with that kind of person who gets angry. They're called a sore loser.
Yeah.
And what's happening is not just competitive fire, but they've elevated the priority of this game beyond the reasonableness of life.
They went from that anger that can become fuel to rage that just burns everything.
But it isn't just the anger that has ramped up. It's the equitableness of it. It's just a game.
Oh, I see.
So when
you're making something that's not a big deal.
And I hit a bad shot, I can feel an anger at a level that's a determination, but I can feel an anger that I end up having to apologize to the Lord because this isn't that important.
Right.
It's a good thing. I like it, enjoy it.
Yeah.
I want to get better. I want to be determined.
Yeah.
But to be angry and swear, I've crossed a line.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to fight for my life with my family and I'm angry and swear, I probably don't even hesitate.
Yeah.
I don't tell the Lord, and I don't stop what I'm doing and say, Lord, I shouldn't have said that word. I'm sorry. No, forget that. It's petty because this issue is so big.
Right.
In proportion, I would say.
So I have that conversation a lot in the context of being angry at what people say to you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, why is that a big deal?
Yeah.
Because now you've elevated their opinion of you.
Yes.
But I'd have to play with it a little bit around the video game. And I just use video games as an example of ambition.
Yeah.
Because I want that, like, I am not as I should be.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm going to drive,
Yeah.
I'm going to push. And
Yeah.
I would take, when Paul
I agree
says,
with
I
that.
buffet my body,
Yeah.
right, and make it obedient. I mean, they're literally trying to make their thumbs do the thing,
Right.
you know?
But so I'm not as I should be.
Yeah.
Don't we have to say that? And this gets to the war analogy. There's two aspects of that are true. Number one, what you just said, I buffet my body then. And number two, Paul said, I am under no condemnation. I have a law on my members waging war against me.
Yeah.
First Peter, abstain from these worldly lusts that wage war against your soul. Mm-hmm. So you're not what you should be, and you're morally lower than the calling of the high calling that is given
That's
to
right.
you.
You're not measuring up.
You're not measuring up. And it isn't meant to beat you down, but in the gospel, you go and say, this is what I am, Lord. And I want now. So the one is, I want to get better because it's a virtue. Mm-hmm. The other is, I want to get better because this is morally bad. This is not living the high calling, right? And those, they can be happening at the same time, but they are different.
Okay. I am not making that distinction when I think about it. So I'd have to wrestle with that a little bit more.
Okay.
Because I think we have a moral obligation to be who we could be. And so when we let that anger become rage, we're going into a sin of commission.
I agree with that.
So I guess I see that.
And we have a moral obligation to not be who we were.
That's right. Yeah.
Both are true. Mm-hmm. Okay. So war. I was thinking about this, the things carried over. There's a tons of contact points.
Yeah.
Armies, soldiers, weapons, armor, strategy, discouragement.
I would say casualties.
Casualties.
Yeah.
There's a ton of what I would say, I think I could find a verse in Scripture that says something, and its metaphoric connection is a war.
Yeah.
And it's now in the Christian life. But then I was thinking, what do they mean and what's carried over? So all these, I'm going to call them shell words for a moment. They all get carried over in their original context. What they mean, they get carried over. Mm-hmm. But then here's my point. I want to get your response to it. But then they're all inverted. They're all transformed and changed. Mm-hmm. And they're done so by one fundamental thing, that the first weapon of war, the Roman cross, instrument of dominion and totalitarian of warfaring, was assaulted on Jesus.
Yeah.
And its weapon was used in an offensive, not insulting, but offensive, like going on offense. Mm-hmm. It slew him.
Yeah.
And instead of fighting back with whatever other weaponry he had, he did fight back, but it with not the equivalent looking weaponry, he submits to it. That's his weaponry. And by submitting to it, he transformed it so that this wooden death instrument in Rome, in the world, becomes transformed and inverted and turned upside down and becomes now the word of life in the gospel.
Right.
It becomes the weapon of the world, becomes the weapon of the gospel by turning it upside down and inside out. The shell of the idea carries over.
Okay.
The content of its meaning is radically transformed. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think the reason Jesus got crucified in a tangible sense, obviously it's the will of God that he be crucified, but that he engaged in the spiritual war with so much success that all they had left was the physical war to defeat him, and it couldn't work. And so when he's engaging in the spiritual war of declaring openly, refusing to back down to their demands, refusing to try to make himself publicly, popular, right? His brothers say, "Hey, if you're gonna be a popular guy, you got to go to the Passover and make yourself known." And he's not going to do it. He doesn't entrust himself to any movement, any people, any person of power. He's not going to ingratiate himself to Herod, right, or to Pilate or to anyone else. And so, I don't see an inversion there. What I see is rather like a separation, that we engage in the war until it gets physical, and then we say, no, that's not our war. There are physical wars, and some of them are just and right, but we don't declare.
Okay, so let me push back on that.
Okay.
That
I don't
the physical
invert it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. You see it as a leveling up.
Yeah, I think it's an eternal war rather than a tangible temporary war.
My pushback on that would be this: the enemy, the powers behind the powers.
Yep.
So this is if they had known the Lord of Glory, they would not have crucified him. That verse there.
Is that referring to the powers, or is that referring to the Sanhedrin?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think you can't get away from both conclusions.
If they're working together, they're going to know what they know.
And yet there's the force behind it. And as soon as you want to jump into exclusion, the passage doesn't make sense, in my opinion.
Okay.
But the point is that it's not an escalation, because from the beginning in the Revelation, it talks about the dragon. He starts as a serpent, he becomes a dragon over the millennia. He opens his mouth to swallow up the child. Mm-hmm. He hasn't fought yet, to swallow up the woman and all of her descendants. And he's unsuccessful.
Yeah.
So my point being, he's not like waited until Jesus fought the war and then this was the only means necessary. Mm-hmm. I mean, the means able to defeat him. He wanted to gobble him up in a destructive manner from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So, but he wasn't able to. He was prevented by God.
Yeah.
So, to me, I see the weapon of the warfare, the cross, is just. It's the symbol that is where God made the inversion and transformation, but that weaponry has been in play all along for the kingdom of the world to destroy.
So here's how I'm thinking about it, and that is that when we're talking about frustration that can turn to determination or rage, right? And when it turns to rage, it breaks out into physical violence, and rage is almost always fueled by ego. And anger is often this like protective emotion. It's secondary to the fear that you feel that some bad or terrible thing will happen. So I'm afraid this bad thing's going to happen. I get angry to protect myself, and that's kind of the ego's role if you take Freudian concepts of psychoanalysis. Anyway, so if we're turning to the ego and we make it physical, here's an example. I watched this clips from this debate where a pastor was debating another Christian about whether the earth is flat using the Bible verses, right? And how do you interpret these different verses that seem to imply that the earth is flat, and do we take them literally? Do we see other ways to read them? And the round earth pastor got so angry when it was the other guy's turn that he literally told his sound people to turn his mic off and kicked him out of the church, because he refused to accept this guy's interpretation of those Bible verses. And I think, oh, you just lost the debate, even though you were right. Your ego turned into rage and broke out into what I would say was a version of a physical war, right? Because that guy became the opponent rather than the enemy of our souls.
Yeah.
So what I see as the enemy is pride. Pride is what drives you into that physical realm, and therefore, because it's about me, and I have to defend myself.
So what I would say is that I agree that what the cross does is it spiritualize it in transforming and inverting and turning upside down. What is happening is it's saying the spiritual dynamics are of defining power in comparison to physical dynamics.
Yeah.
Rome, you thought you could kill with the cross, and you can take life. But the resurrection says, I'm going to invest this cross with another power that you don't see, that's invisible. It's spiritual and dynamic. And then as a result, I look at all the other words, the carryover words of armies and armor and swords and opponents and enemies. You just said enemy was not the people, not being angry with the people. I think that's completely right.
Yeah.
Paul says, I don't look at anyone after the flesh anymore. I look at knowing the terror of the Lord, I persuade men.
Yeah.
And so that there explicitly, it's not flesh and blood that we wrestle against. It's these powers.
Right.
So that all of the carryover meaning is turned into spiritual realities and emptied of their physical originating meaning.
Yeah.
But that's a little limited because there are things like determination. I was thinking about this. War. The reason you have a war, two people or two nations or two groups, they think it's a life or death issue, whatever the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
You want something, and I think you shouldn't have it so much. You want it so much you're willing to kill me to get it, and don't think you should have it, or I need it so much that I'm willing to kill you.
Right.
If it wasn't that and I let you just have it, then it wouldn't be a war. It'd just be theft. So the war is, the issue is so big it's life or death. To me, that gets carried over in a one-to-one relationship into the gospel. It is life or death.
Yeah.
Now it's just the spiritual
Eternal
dimension.
life.
It's eternal life and eternal death that's at hand. And it's been souls, not just the piece of land or property or wealth that was at stake before.
So one more connection I think would work, and that is, I keep thinking of the passage where it talks about Jesus humbling himself to be obedient on the cross, that he completely entrusted himself in his pursuit of glory. He would take no glory for himself. He wouldn't declare himself to be the Son of God in any kind of open, flamboyant way. You know, he could have brought angels to bear and showed his power, but instead he went to the lowest place, and therefore God elevated him up. And that's what the cross represents, is that lowest place. So I think when we're making that distinction between spiritual war and physical war, although I'll have to think about this more, because I think humility is pivotal in success in tangible war too, right? If you're fighting a physical war for your own glory and for your ego to be like, you're going to be less effective. Because
from an effective standpoint, humility serves a good end,
right,
even in greedy wars.
Yeah. And I think you could see that when Paul talks about some people preach the gospel for selfish, self-glorifying reasons, and yet they still preach the gospel. So I think that same sort of thing plays out in churches too.
The war, in the world's perspective, is always, I need to put my foot on your neck.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's an unjust thing and dominated by pride or whatever, or even, let's say, World War II, which most people would think was a just war that we fought against evil, right?
Yeah.
But in order to win it, they weren't going to go away quietly. So
Right.
we had to put our foot on their neck.
Yeah.
The gospel doesn't do it that way. The gospel...
Oh, no, it literally does.
Well,
It just
so
it's
literally
just a
that
different
it changes the very... Yes, it's the spiritual
But it's from the
neck.
beginning, his foot will crush the serpent's head. Like, it's the same impulse.
But wait.
aimed at a different enemy.
That's the different one, though. I was talking about people.
Yeah.
So you're right.
But I'm saying the impulse to utterly dominate and destroy your enemy is used in godly spiritual war, but to a different enemy.
Yes. And I think the dilemma being the spiritual forces.
Spiritual forces and those who promulgate and represent and do the bidding of and spread the lies of the enemy.
Okay, so I guess we're gonna put a pin in this and move on.
Yeah,
but yeah. I'll leave this question for you, and then you can come back on another time.
Okay.
Where in Scripture would that be seen in the New Testament, Paul or Jesus, doing that towards a surrogate? Towards
a surrogate.
Yeah.
Bar Jesus, the sorcerer who's corrupting the gospel and portraying himself to be the son of Jesus to his own political and corrupt spiritual ends. He's rebuked. He's called the son of the devil. He's struck blind. I think when Jesus calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, it's a similar when John the Baptist says, the axe is at the root of the tree, brood of vipers. All these are things in the New Testament.
I agree that those are statements, but are they the same as putting a foot on the neck?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would argue that.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you like what we're talking, the way we're talking, Luke has a school and he'll teach your kids to think about things as well.
Yep.
All right, let's ask another question here.
All right. We're going to lighten the mood a little bit.
We are.
That was heavy.
I know. Manosphere.
The manosphere. Okay. There's an artist, fine art, like he's a painter. His name's Arthur Kwan Lee. And he makes these, I feel like his paintings have actually been moving more and more toward Christianity. He's very traditional minded. So a lot of his art was around, Greek and Roman style of Greek statues and that sort of thing. But he also uses a lot of imagery of different religions. Well, now it's more and more focused on Jesus. But he has a lot of commentary along the side. He's very sort of macho conservative, but in his own way. And here's the quote he said. He said, a lot of the manosphere, and whenever I hear manosphere, I think of like Andrew Tate and his acolytes, right? These guys who put on this macho, often a denigration of women and accentuating wealth and muscles and all that. He says, a lot of the manosphere influencers are watched by men in the same manner that the Kardashians are watched by women. And I think that's totally exactly right. That it's this caricature of femininity in the Kardashians and a caricature of masculinity. And I think some people are really drawn into it, but most people are sort of like embarrassing and yet like entertained by the exaggeration of it as sort of a feeling of rebalancing.
Think Duck Dynasty is the same?
I've never watched Duck Dynasty. Okay. I don't know. I don't know if they're caricature. They definitely are caricature of the South.
They
I
are.
Think. Yeah.
They're complete caricature, and it's a manly caricature. It's not the Tate kind.
Right.
But it is exactly the same category.
I think part of the reason those get enjoyed the way they do is as a reaction to a culture that's very androgynous or very, very don't be manly or don't be feminine.
Yeah.
Right? Women should be like men, men should be like women. Yeah. And these are the representatives say, no, we're actually going to go all the way the other direction.
Yeah. And one of the hardest things for any person is to be in balance. It's very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
It's way easier to work by when you have an argument or a discussion that is making points. You always pick something that is an extreme illustration in order to try to draw out the point you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And it can be unfair, but it's also pretty understandable. Another question. Now and Then, the Beatles put out their last video.
Yeah, I watched that.
You and I, did you watch it? Oh, good. I'm interested in your take.
I'm not a huge Beatles fan, to be honest.
Yeah,
I did like that Yesterday movie.
We're at different ends of the same generational years that they put.
Yeah.
And so I was intrigued by what you think about the Beatles and their last album, or not last song and whatnot. How did that come across to you?
To me, it felt like AI generated a song, taking in all the Beatles like popular. It just felt like a stamp of like, oh yeah, it's Beatles, I guess. And watching the video with all the AI generated imagery kind of confirmed that. It had very little moving components because it's literally a nostalgia play, which a lot of movies are playing into that, right? All the movies from when we were kids are now getting remade, not only so our kids will watch them, but so that we'll go with them and see the Ghostbusters, right? Or see the
what about
Superman
nostalgia?
redone.
You're saying it as a detriment. Now Ozzy Osbourne is saying he wants to have, his hope is to have enough health to have his last tour.
Yeah, right.
Now I think Madonna's had 3 last tours. But
nostalgia makes a lot of money, right? I mean, I was talking to my wife about this. We were driving through my hometown, and it was like, oh, the familiarity just makes me want to come here. For no purpose. It's not...
okay, I'm going to disagree with you.
It's just the draw of that comfort of childhood.
I'm going to disagree, and here's why.
Okay.
There's a legitimacy to saying goodbye.
Yeah.
That's not...
To the Beatles?
That's to anybody. Barbra Streisand, Madonna. Pick your favorite... I mean, this happens with the person of fame and art, especially musicians, because their art is experienced as it is now. Like a painting, you don't have a last tour for a painter, for example.
Sure.
But if you have... I mean, I read some articles about people who went to Barbra Streisand's last, big thing, and they're saying goodbye and thank you. Thank you for... And I've gotten joy
I
out
don't
of
think
this.
of it as goodbye. Like when they're remaking Transformers, right? They're not doing it so you can say goodbye. They're doing it so that
I agree with that. On
you can
Transformers.
relive your childhood a little bit and get excited about a new
I completely
reinvention.
agree with that one. But the Beatles
That's how I
Now
see
and
the
Then
Beatles.
is... Oh, I don't see it at all that way. This is the last one. There is no other songs. They've said it.
They'll AI generate albums forever.
This one wasn't AI generated, by the way. But in any case,
okay.
The video imagery was.
Right.
They were overlapping. They used some AI. I don't want to get into that. In how they separated John's voice from the piano he was playing. They used algorithm that they didn't have before. I
can appreciate it. I don't have anything bad about it. What I see is our culture is so obsessed, not so obsessed, we're so inundated with sequels and reboots and reinvention of the same old characters. It's like we're creating our own version of the Greek gods, right? How many different Spider-Mans are we going to get in 10 years?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, as many as it takes
Yeah.
to get more money, right?
Yeah, I
and the
don't see
reason that we
this
do it
in
is
that frame at
because
all.
if I reinvent the same old thing, I
Yeah.
can guarantee that people will go to it for that feeling of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to see that
Yeah.
old thing in a new way.
Yeah. All right. Entertainment. Mind-numbing amusement.
Well, so the idea of the word amuse
Yep.
is to have no thought, right? Muse is to think and be creative, and to amuse, like an atheist, an amuse. And I think the goal of a lot of entertainment, and I think of this myself, is to shut your brain off, because your brain's got a lot going on. I just want to watch something and feel, right? Let my heart connect to what's going on so that my brain doesn't have to think about this. And what I see, I was going through, Doug Wilson put out this morning his reply to the criticism he was getting last week. And part of that reply was a promotional video from his church talking about making entertainment that's Christian, right? And that we're giving our money to Disney and Warner and all these people that are godless, and not just godless, but God-hating. And saying, no, let's use entertainment to turn our brains on. I think, wait, they don't understand what entertainment's for. And I think that Christians fall into this a lot, especially Christians who are of a more theological mind. Their worship of God is very intellectual, and they think they're going to fix culture with intellect. And it's only one aspect. It's not enough.
You're using amusement in the positive side of it. That entertainment has a positive thing.
I think it's an absolute necessity of life.
Of not engaging the thoughts, but engaging other faculties, and in fact, frankly, resting the thoughts.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, if you've heard of Neil Postman. I didn't know that's the direction you were going to go with this, but he had a book he wrote in the 80s. It was got very popular, called Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Well, and originally, so this was a lesson I taught way back when I was teaching Christian high school lessons on ethics and culture. And I took that same stance of like, amusement's bad. You're turning your brain off. You're vulnerable. That's true. But in the same way that you would have fun with someone you trust. Once you trust them, you can have way more fun than with your people you don't know. And because you don't have to then analyze everything they say and make sure you're safe. So if you can create a safe environment to be amused, amusement becomes really vital. We shouldn't just say, oh, we always have to be analyzing everything we watch and listen to.
Do you think that I think your point is legitimate and valid. Do you think you come to it, you and I both think more than most people. B, you've actually talked about, you have a hard time turning your mind off.
Yeah.
Do you think that you come to it driven by those, in a sense, necessities, quote unquote?
I think so, yeah. And it also is an expression of my desire to connect with that Trinitarian idea, to say, okay, I worship God with my brain. When I want to worship God, I study the Bible. I want to understand it. I study culture and psychology and history and all these things, even math. That's not my whole self. So what am I missing?
That's right.
So that's what I'm trying to get back to. So in the past, I would have said, everybody needs to worship the way I do.
Yeah.
You need to have this intellectual faith.
Okay, good point. Let's go on. Let's do a couple quick catch-up political things. Did you see Walmart dumped Musk?
Yep, he dumped Elon.
Dumped Elon. What do you think about the whole dust-up?
We'll see if it'll make him pay.
You remember I said I didn't think it would last.
And
then 3 days later, Walmart
jumped in. Yeah. I was talking to my wife, kind of trying to update her on this, and she says, well, I guess we're done with Walmart. And here's the reality is, like I was saying last time, I still think it's true, is that Twitter is a very masculine space. It's very men arguing with themselves. And so men don't make the majority of purchasing decisions in the household. Women do. They go shopping. They buy the things the family needs. They buy the gifts, right? That's the humorous thing. The men find out Christmas morning what they got their kids, just like the kids do.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily as dangerous for Walmart.
Yeah.
If the majority of their shoppers are women.
Right.
To jump off of a platform where the vast majority are men.
Right. I've wondered if it will unintended consequences of pushing their revenue streams in different and creative ways.
Yeah. Well, and it's also why Target got hit, because Target went after kids, trying to trans kids and promote all this stuff. Yeah. And so now you're going to get those moms who go to Target saying, whoa, we're not down with this. Yeah. And they're going to get fired up.
Yeah. All right. Elections. I have a question. You saw the thing with Milei, and he was in Argentina.
Yeah.
And whatever his name is in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who can pronounce names.
I know. And then what's her name? The first South Carolina had its first. Charleston, his first governor in like 100 years. It's Republican.
Wow.
Anyway.
Mayor of Charleston.
Yeah. So these strange victories, right?
But Trump's not winning these victories, even since 2020.
My question isn't about Trump at all.
Oh, okay.
My question is about, do you think one of two, if you had to pick one of the two, which would you pick? I saw a person advocate, the right is awakening.
Okay.
To the woke crazy, and the right is awakening. Okay. That was one take.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought was an alternative is it's driven by immigration insanity. That single issue
Immigration seems to be the issue everywhere, doesn't it? In Europe, it certainly is. Yeah. Although the farming issue was a big one in Europe, in Denmark in particular, right?
Yeah.
That those
the power hungry, we're going to take your cows and your farms.
The Netherlands, rather. Yeah. I think it's probably both, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I've used this before. If you look at the scale of opponent versus supporter, that there's the active supporter, the inactive supporter, the neutral, the active opponent, the inactive opponent. So to say, are the people who are against the insanity moving into the active zone? Yeah. And are the people in the middle moving into the, I'm actually against this? A little bit, yeah. Because you don't have to be that active to just not buy Bud Light, right? Yeah. Or to just vote. Even voting, it's not that much of a buy-in. Versus to say, no, I'm going to get politically engaged. I'm going to go door to door. I'm going to post things that might get me fired. I'm going to fight this thing. That's another level. And they both can happen at the same time.
Yeah, I tend to think that too. I would like to think it's the right awakening, but I don't. I think the right is awakening a little bit, but I don't think those are reflections of it.
Well, I think if 10% of the right wakes up, it would be a massive change.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a huge
majority. I think it's the insanity issue of immigration. Yeah. And we can't. It's the straws that are breaking the camel's backs.
Yep.
Okay, here's another question I have for you, and I literally don't know the answer. Why is Sam Bankman-Fried, Fried, Democrat, massive donor, why is he paying for his crimes?
That's unique. So he's the guy who had the fake Bitcoin.
Yeah, the Bitcoin
He was
stuff.
Fraudulently creating a marketplace for Bitcoin to be
Billions.
Exchanged.
Yeah.
Why is he paying for his crimes? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think that...
Do you think it's odd?
I think that there's enough people who are saying, you mess with my wallet, you're going to pay the price. A lot of those people, if you mess with social things, they don't care that much. So there's a whole part of the society that's socially liberal, but they're investing there. And Bitcoin is this. It's very democratic. Like it's the everyday guy who figured this Bitcoin thing out and made a bunch of money.
So the mistake he made was not becoming a sloganeer for social issues. He just gave to Democrat politicians.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that his social engineering was not enough to save him when you go up against the big banks, because Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are at odds with the Federal Reserve and the big banking system.
At this time, yeah.
So they're against him, right? The everyday guys are getting screwed. Those everyday investors, they're getting screwed, so they're against him. And your social people they're not enough to come save him. The leftists, they're not going to be able to pull power to rescue him when you've got that big of a opponent.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more point here.
All right.
Israel, U.S. intelligence. There was an article. Wait, I'm going to go back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to go back actually and say something. Where was it? Oh, the immigration insanity. You know who made that point? Was James Carville.
Oh, yeah. I saw that.
If you're going to be the party of chaos, you're going to pay a price for it.
And so when he was saying chaos, was he just talking about immigration? Because when I read I just read the headline. I saw you post it.
Yeah.
I think everything about the left is chaos.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
He actually said the word disorder.
Yeah.
Same deal. It as reflected primarily in immigration. That's what's being seen. That's how he's interpreting these surprising victories on the right spread across the world.
But the trans madness, the schools, that's all chaos too.
I completely agree. Yeah. He didn't bundle those together.
Yeah.
But he's nevertheless, as a Democrat, he's acknowledging a problem.
Right.
And he's giving an assessment of it.
But if you said chaos or disorder, it's interesting what springs to mind, which issue, right?
I know, yes.
Because everybody's got a different one.
Because
it's such a multi-fronted attack. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Victor Davis Hansen had a great article on this, listing the areas of disorder and chaos. It's a massive list.
Yeah.
And he puts in his little succinct way each paragraph. Who would have ever considered the sanity of, and then da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And who would have, the most common sense approach to da-da-da-da-da. It's overwhelming. Anyway, all right, last one, Israel and U.S. intelligence. Just saw an article, communications director for NSA comes out and says, all indications are that U.S. intelligence did not know about the Hamas invasion.
Right.
This is in light of this thing that just came out that Israel had an indication of this particular invasion 1 year ago on paper. Okay.
Yep.
But goes to your prior point last time that there's a lot of papers.
They just didn't believe it was possible.
There's lots of them.
Yeah.
And so it's a little unfair to be rearview mirror judging in some respects.
You have to see where the hole was. They got through.
Yep.
But I was watching headlines of the current Hamas leaders right now saying, "Oh, October 7th was just the beginning. We've got so many plans.
Today. We have an equivalent plan that's more."
And it's like, oh, okay. So if they're saying this all the time and never doing it, you just stop believing them.
Yeah,
that's part of their strategy.
Yeah, that's right.
They cry wolf every day.
That's right.
Yeah.
However, the article, I thought, meant the exact opposite by the way it was worded. It's the same way with the Hunter Biden laptop article. This has all the marks of a Russian thing.
You can take the same data and change the headline and get a totally different
And
story.
by the word you use, you hedge your bets. So this article says there is no indication that the U.S. intelligence knew this. To me, here's how I interpret it. Okay, that means they knew.
Oh, yeah.
You don't say it that way. If you're trying to make the point that the U.S. intelligence didn't know, you just say they didn't know.
Right.
You don't say this craftily articulated sentence.
Well, but
it gives yourselves
it's tricky because that's how lawyers talk. And lawyers are crafting all of these headlines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so my first thought was,
or at least all the press releases.
This is an intelligence agency article. That's exactly what I thought.
I would guess
I conclude the opposite.
80% of articles are intelligence agencies created.
I know. All right. Did you see the? We're going to try to have lister questions and comments.
We did have one.
Did you see it before I put it on here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I really have no point to putting it on here other than that it was listed.
It's on this same topic we were talking about.
Grandpa Sanders.
Do you know who she's talking about?
I don't know Grandpa Sanders.
Okay, so
I had to look at the picture to know who Cheryl was because I didn't know that until I saw the picture. Grandpa Sanders was a radio operator while they were tracking the Japanese fleet. ... They knew.
They knew. Yeah. So the question is, did the U.S. intelligence, did the president
we were
know that Pearl Harbor was going to happen?
Here's the larger point to that. It wasn't so much what the fact is there, and it wasn't so much what the fact is in Israel, but it's saying this on second thought. We have to think deeper. We, as Christians, have to hold out if we were to find out that Netanyahu knew about it and let it happen, it shouldn't shake us. Now, we hope that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it happens.
Well, it feels like...
Our leaders make decisions that feel like betrayals, and they have reasons, and we can agree or disagree. But we shouldn't view this event in only the lens of purity. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Because Pearl Harbor was viewed in a lens of purity, but history has shown there was some other impure things taking place there. And that shouldn't shake us.
Well, so the question is, are we trusting people too much, right? Are we trusting our leaders too much? I think that's the question you have to ask after the fact when there's such
and placing
a failure.
Our stability in that assumption of their trustworthiness then.
Well, if we have to vote in another leader and we know the current one has failed us to such a degree, we have to ask ourselves, was that failure justified? Like, would anybody have made that mistake? So the thing I think of is there was a school shooting, I don't remember, a few years back, where the police all just circled out and didn't go in.
Yeah, this is in
Texas.
Texas.
And it just gave this this huge amount of time for this guy to keep killing people.
Yep.
And people were trying to go in and the police were stopping them.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there was this clear, okay, that was a massive failure. We have to look at that.
Yeah.
And so that's always the question is, was it a mistake anybody would have made? because there's a constant stream of intelligence and some of it's really not useful at all. Or like my mom, this was my mom talking about her dad whose ship was sunk at Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
So he was at Pearl Harbor that day on leave. Like, remember that Pearl Harbor movie,
Yes,
the Michael Bay movie? It basically was about him, minus the whole romantic triangle thing. Like, he was on leave that day. His friends went down in that ship. He said the movie was realistic, except that the bay was red with blood and floating bodies everywhere. He almost died. He was in his 70s when that movie came out. And the effect of it, watching it on the screen, he didn't eat for a week and he nearly died just because all of that memory came flooding back. Yeah. So, did they know? Yeah, they probably did. Did Israel know? Yeah, they got Hamas's plan a year in advance, but they wrote it off.
That's the thing. And I actually posted a response back, asked the question, did they know in general something might happen? Or did they know a particular Pearl Harbor?
Well, I think what they knew is that the Japanese fleet was coming. And so I think that was the thing. And I remember after 9/11, the big conversation people were having was the same.
I remember.
And the conclusion I found, I think most significant was...
It's still controversial.
The conclusion was the failure was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of imagination, that they could do something so creatively evil. And I think whenever these sorts of things happen, that's what it is. There's a common reaction. The most common reaction that people have during a school shooting is they freeze and they tell themselves, this isn't real. I can't believe this is happening. And they're literally verbalizing their own denial because they can't imagine that something this evil could happen.
Yeah.
And it stops them in their tracks.
Yeah, shock.
And I think that happens to governments and leaders. I think that's what you saw in Maui as well.
All right, let's do our last thing, and then we're going to sign off. Tell me what you got here about obesity and corruption. You have a question rising from it.
All right, so there's this little idea.
This is our final segment.
I just saw an interesting graph of two things. One, when they measure corruption, there's nonprofits, international nonprofits who measure corruption in governments around the world. And then they correlated it with the obesity of the officials. They found that the more obese the officials, the more the corruption was in those governments. And on the other side of it, when these countries introduced anti-corruption measures, where they were creating accountability, where they were hiring people based on their backgrounds and not based on nepotism or connections, and they saw a decrease in actual corruption, what they also saw was a decrease in obesity among the officials. And it's which causes which, right? There's not a clarity there.
Yeah.
But it confirmed to me this idea, or it didn't confirm it, it brought it up again, of like, do we trust people whose indulgences are so intense that they would become morbidly obese, right? And I've seen a lot of pastors who've been really successful and widely considered, influential, and are very overweight. And I think that, to me, that's a red flag. It's a red flag like you would have any other addictive, compulsive behavior. That doesn't seem like a healthy way that a leader should be.
Do you have any caveats to that red flag?
Like what?
There are medical conditions that people have. There are people who are overweight, as an illustration, and they're not overindulgers.
Yeah, but not to the severe. For sure, it's very hard to not be overweight. If you're our age at all. I think technically we probably both are. Just if you look at the chart, you're this tall, you should weigh this much. And I agree, and I work really hard to not be. But there's a point where someone is just morbidly obese, and you say, this person there's something off, right? There's something out of balance in their inner life, and it's expressing in this way that they live and relate with food. And I think you could see it with sex, you could see it with drugs, you could see it with other things that are good that have become unhealthy. And that's not even considering things that are not good.
So I agree with you completely. And it does generate, I think, a level of mistrust or distrust or yellow flag. We'll call it yellow flag.
Yellow flag, okay.
I also think it transcends weight, obesity. I think the same thing. I've met people when I'm golfing that their relationship to golf is the same exact yellow flag. It's an overindulgence.
Oh, yeah, right.
And to the degree that at times has made me think I don't even want to do this. It makes it disgusting because I don't want to be that.
I
don't want to be retirement.
Here's the other side of that, because I think this is what you're saying is, I almost would put it in the same category as a pastor or even a leader who dresses too well or is so fit, right? So obsessed with their performance in lifting weights or running or other things. It's like, whoa, this feels out of balance.
Yes, that's
feels
right.
almost obsessive.
Yes.
And there's just a spiritual unhealth.
Yeah. So why do you say pastors too? What's your point in it? Are they participate in that, you're saying?
I think
in
pastors,
corruption?
Well, when pastors become corrupt, right, and this comes back to our last episode, they don't have the power that a government official would have, so they're not going to be able to extort necessarily, although they might embezzle or they might sleep around or do other things.
I think this is a dilemma. When you find somebody that so challengingly can't say no to something,
right,
then the likelihood of they can't say no in other areas grows.
Yeah.
Including off-limit areas.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I remember, I've never forgotten a man who will never hear this appreciation, but gave a sermon when I was in college. Don't touch the first five was his point. Pastoring. Don't take the first $5. The first time you want to take a $5 bill because you end up being alone with the money, and you need $5 and you think you're underpaid and you're stressed out and nobody's appreciating you and you just need this or that, or you left your wallet at home. You forgot it and you have to have lunch today.
It's okay.
And you'll pay it. Don't touch the first five. And he's basically saying you have to say no. If you stop saying no, you're not in control entirely of where this goes.
It reminds me when we were talking about, is it Matthew Perry, the Friends actor who died? I listened to an interview with him talking about his addiction. And he said, the first drink is the choice. After that, it gets very murky as to whether I'm able to do anything except keep going.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with that completely, but I think there's choices along the way. To say it was only the first choice.
Yes, it shouldn't be an exclusive, but there's
But
something
it is a
there.
slippery slope.
Yes, that's right. That's right. All right, you've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. Anything else you want to add? Are we good?
I think we're good.
All right. If you enjoyed the episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend and start a good conversation. And remember, dig a little deeper and think again.
See you next time.